Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our 37th class, our fireside. Tonight, we're going to talk very informally about a very interesting and sort of elusive subject, and that is the process that the manifestations go through when they reveal the Word of God. What is the revelatory process? And I have some slides and some quotes that we'll use. But a lot of this, I hope you will understand, as with all my presentations, are my own views as I infer them from what I read in the writings. And some of them have come over a long period of time. The more I read, the more refined or the more convinced I've become that one thing is happening as opposed to another. Of course, the main thing we want to know is, or at least I wanted to know when I was a new Baha'i, are they simply repeating literally the words that God whispers in their ears or in their consciousness? Or are they the authors of their own utterances, but have the inspiration that they should say these particular things, or just a particular subject and they make up the words? Whatever is happening, it's a remarkable process. And as I've mentioned before in other talks, it is the foremost proof of the manifestations is their utterances, not their person, are not the miracles. I mentioned that there are approximately 5 categories of proof at the end of the Kitab-i-Iqan, and the very first one, which covers some 20 pages, from page about 198 to page 121, to 221, is all of that is the first proof, which is the utterances of the prophet. So that's what we're going to discuss tonight, is what can we infer from the writings is taking place. So let me turn on my presentation, and first let me share my screen, and then go to the presentation from the beginning. And so here we go. The revelatory process. Now, the first thing I wanted to mention was that, as many of you know, I am a writer myself, and I have been for a long time. And so I know something about what is required when one undertakes to write a book, particularly a book of some size, such as, say, the Kitab-i-Iqan. Well, that's 200 and some pages. Well, I am finishing right now, as it happens, the first draft of a book that is about 200 and some pages. I started about a year ago, and I finished the first draft. Now, the shortest time it's ever taken me to write a book was 3 months. That was a book called Understanding Death, and it was just sort of a very informal, free-flowing kind of thing. But even so, after I'd finished that 3 months of writing, I had to go through several months more of editing. Usually it takes about 3 to 4 drafts before I've got something that an editor will then copy edit. And then it goes through back and forth discussions about what we agree on or don't agree on. And so when you have verified information that Baha'u'llah revealed the Kitab-i-Iqan in 2 nights and 2 days, and you have a work so highly organized, I've outlined that whole work in my book, The Ocean of His Words, simply to show how organized it is. And it wasn't hard to do. I mean, it wasn't hard in the sense that it's so organized that it's clear what point he's on or what sub point and so on. And of course, there's this famous statement by Mirza Abul Fazl, the great Baha'i scholar, lauded by Abdul Baha as the greatest scholar of the Baha'i faith. They found when they opened after his death, they opened his Kitabi Gan, and he says, I'm reading for the 29th time. There is still so much to learn. And that's true. And this was done in 2 nights and 2 days. And of course, the revelatory process is also distinct in that this is spontaneous. There's no hesitation. There are no revisions. And so we're going to look at the process as it took place with Baha'u'llah. We've discussed it as it took place with Muhammad, where his words were also taken down as he spoke or soon after he spoke. I wanted to start with this dear picture, excuse me, of Shoghi Effendi, who was not a manifestation and who had to do a great deal of learning and revising for his work. And so you appreciate immensely, if you're a student of language, that he was known in many circles, I think at Cambridge. And I think it was Adib Tahirzadeh who was, when he was at a university of Tehran, his professor told him, do you know who the greatest writer, prose writer is in Persian? And nobody knew, or nobody guessed. And he looked at Adib and says, it's your guardian. And then when he was at Cambridge, I believe it was Cambridge, it may have been Oxford, but I think it was Cambridge because that's where the guardian went. He also went to Oxford. He said, do you know who the greatest writer in English is? A different teacher. And again, the answer was Shoghi Effendi. This from someone, of course, he dedicated himself to studying English. He used to read the Oxford English Dictionary. And he was an amazing writer. But here he is at a little portable typewriter. I think this was taken when he was working on God Passes By, or it may have been Nabil. But imagine that here I have it for my work, a computer with all kinds of devices that enable me to research things without having to leave my chair. And if you've ever read God Passes By, and I hope you have, or Nabil's Dawnbreakers, the scholarship is just uncanny. It's true in all of his works, the things he alludes to. So all of this helps us appreciate more the miraculous process of the revelatory process. As I said, and you'll notice I've highlighted here pages 198 through 221. This is a quote from the very last of it, the conclusion of this discussion of how the verses, the utterances of the prophet is the greatest proof of their possessing, if you will, otherworldly knowledge and otherworldly capacity and creative powers. Therefore, should a person arise and bring forth a myriad verses, discourses, epistles, and prayers, none of which have been acquired through learning, what conceivable excuse could justify those that reject them and deprive themselves of the potency of their grace? What answer could they give when once their soul hath ascended and departed from its gloomy temple? Meaning, when you get to the next world, what excuse are you going to have if you've read these verses and realized that they were produced in this manner and didn't pay attention? From this same discussion, and this is on page 204, so this is just a few pages into this discussion, he quotes Muhammad as giving this same proof. In another passage, he, Muhammad, likewise saith, and this is from the Quran, as you can see, Surah 2, verse 23, and if ye be in doubt as to that which we have sent down to our servant, then produce a surah like it and summon your witnesses beside God, if ye are men of truth. The 205 shouldn't be there. That's just the page number. Now, The we here, of course, is the same we that we have, say, in the hidden words, where that's God speaking through Gabriel to Muhammad, and our servant is Muhammad. So Baha'u'llah says this same thing when he's being challenged, uh, especially by Mirza Yahya. And that's a long story about their meetings, or the 3 times that Mirza Yahya said he would meet and confront Baha'u'llah in Adrianople, but he never showed. The enduring concept of logos. Now, the word logos has Greek origin. It's taken most generally to mean the word. It actually has a lot more meanings than that, the concept of knowledge and so on. But in Christian theology, it takes its meaning from this very famous passage from the first part of the book of John. In the beginning was the Word. Notice the W is capitalized because it represents both the Word of God and Christ. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. And of course, the darkness can represent the period of darkness when a religion is in decline, and it can represent the obliviousness of the people to whom the manifestation comes. So the first question then, as I said, that occurred to me when I was a new Baha'i was, are the words of their own devising? And my answer from my own study, you can decide on your own, is yes, they are of their own devising. What happens exactly, how the inspiration, how specific the inspiration is, I don't know. I remember in a conversation I had with noted Baha'i scholar Farouz Kazimzadeh, he said that when the words say, and you have the colon, and then the words, that's direct. And then, but without that, then, so I said, unless it says say, then he's just paraphrasing the words of God, because I was being silly, but I was serious in the sense that they're all the words of God. So when the word say is there, you get the sense that means he is inspired to say this, maybe not the specific words, but the ideas or the specific thoughts. But that's a whole nother discussion. By my spirit and by my favor and by my mercy and by my beauty, all that I have revealed unto thee with the tongue of power and have written for thee with the pen of might hath been in accordance with thy capacity and understanding, not with my state and the melody of my voice. And there are other places where he says similarly that if we wrote as to a level that would satisfy us, you wouldn't understand a word I have to say. So in other words, I have fashioned these utterances to your capacity. And in a later class, we'll discuss what he says in the Suri Hakel, the tablet of the temple, the surah of the temple. The fact that he speaks in 9 different styles or modes. It's translated sometimes styles, sometimes modes. I think it's modes in the authoritative translation that we now have. But at any rate, we're going to discuss what could that mean. Whatever it means that he has the capacity to write in any style or fashion he thinks is appropriate for the subject and the audience for which that subject is intended. Now, this is another quote that caught my attention along these lines. As you know, when you read the writings of Baha'u'llah, it depends on what you're looking for as to what you'll find. And sometimes you'll read over something and it means nothing to you, and you'll read over it again, and the question that you have on your mind at that time appears. Well, that happened to me with this. It struck out to me, struck out in my mind that outlined, highlighted portion. Alluded to, now here is Shoghi Effendi discussing in God Passes By the supreme station of the Kitabi Agdas. So, alluded to in the Kitabi Gan, the principal repository of that law which the prophet Isaiah had anticipated, and which the writer of the Apocalypse, St. John the Divine, had described as the new heaven and the new earth, as the tabernacle of God, or the temple of God, as the holy city, as the bride, the new Jerusalem come down from God. This most holy book, whose provisions must remain inviolate for no less than 1,000 years, and whose system will embrace the entire planet, may well be regarded as the brightest emanation of the mind of Baha'u'llah, as the mother book of his dispensation and the charter of his new world order. And what caught me, of course, is the fact that it's not, you get the sense here that it is not Baha'u'llah simply being a conduit or an amanuensis for God. And I think that's true, as I discussed when we were discussing Islam, when Muhammad says that all he's doing is repeating what the angel Gabriel says to him. This is the same sort of, if you will, benign and divine fiction, that it's an inspiration, but it's Muhammad's words. That becomes very important, because other words he spoke where he was not in this translate-like state were not as accepted as authoritative, such as the hadiths. Now we're going to look at a second really important issue or question, insight, if you will, into this process. What does it feel like from his point of view? So some of the statements we have about that, and we don't have that many. Of course, one is this description of his experience in the Sea of Chal. One night in a dream, he himself calling to mind in the evening of his life the first stirrings of God's revelation within his soul, has written, "These exalted words were heard on every side. Verily we shall render thee victorious by thyself and by thy pen. Grieve thy not for that which hath befallen thee, neither be thou afraid, for thou art in safety. Ere long will God raise up the treasures of the earth, men who will aid thee through thyself and through thy name, wherewith God hath revived the hearts of such as have recognized him." That was from God Passes By, and so is this. In another passage, he describes briefly and graphically the impact of the onrushing force of the divine summons upon his entire being, and experience vividly recalling the vision of God that caused Moses to fall in a swoon, and the voice of Gabriel, which plunged Muhammad into such consternation that, hurrying to the shelter of his home, he bade his wife, Khadijah, envelop him in his mantle. "During the days I lay in the prison of Tehran," are his own memorable words, "though the galling weight of the change and the stench-filled air allowed me but little sleep. Still in those infrequent moments of slumber, I felt as if something flowed from the crown of my head over my breast, even as a mighty torrent that precipitated itself upon the earth from the summit of a lofty mountain. Every limb of my body would, as a result, be set afire. At such moments, my tongue recited what no man could bear to hear." So there's the way Baha'u'llah describes not exactly the process, does he hear words or just inspiration, but he feels this power. And later we're going to see one more passage that will describe what it looked like when he was doing this, and you will see it later in the presentation. So let's go to the objective views of the process. And I don't know how they're objective in the sense other people watching it take place. Now, first, we're going to talk about the process itself as seen by others. And put simply, Baha'u'llah, when he was ready to reveal something, would always have at his side an amanuensis, a scribe. And the most famous one is Mirza Khan. And we're going to see a picture of Mirza Khan. And then he would chant the utterances, reveal the utterances just once. And Mirza Khan could not write fast enough, nor could anyone else, to keep up with his words. And so Mirza Khan developed his own shorthand script. But sometimes Mirza Khan couldn't understand his own shorthand, and he would go back to Baha'u'llah and say, "What did you say right here?" And Baha'u'llah would tell him. But there was no revision, no editing. And so here's a description of it. Whenever revelation came to Baha'u'llah, whether in his humble dwelling in Baghdad or in the bitter cold of Adrianople, whether sailing by sea or traveling by land, whether in the prison cell of Akka or in his spacious mansion at Baha'i, Mirza Khan was invariably ready with quantities of paper, some ink pots, and a bundle of reed pens to record the utterances of Baha'u'llah as they streamed from his lips. Owing to the rapidity with which his words were revealed, the first recordings were not easily legible and had to be transcribed again. After approving these tablets, Baha'u'llah sometimes authenticated them with one of his seals. And these are some of his seals. Notice they're not seal rings, they are seals that you hold in your hand and impress upon the paper to show that this is authentically by me. The Orientals do the same thing. And this is a configuration of an imprint that was put together by these same seals, imprinting them in a calligraphic design. So that's the imprint of the seals. And this is Mirza Khan. And of course, the strange thing that ultimately happens with Mirza Khan is that in spite of his being one of the first to recognize Baha'u'llah and being at his side and being in effect the one through whom the word reached the believers, in fact, he was the one who chanted the tablet of the Holy Mariner after Baha'u'llah revealed it when they were in the field, that terrifying thing, image of what was about to happen. Mirza Khan became a covenant breaker. After the death of Baha'u'llah, he did not follow Abdul Baha, but became a tool in the hands of the unfaithful brother, younger brother of, or half brother of Abdul Baha, to occupy the mansion of Baji and so on. And we'll discuss that whole episode later. Abdul Baha was another of his amanuenses. He was a transcriber for his father from the time he was in his early teens. And here he is at age 24, which occurred to me is the same age that Shoghi Effendi was when he became head of the Baha'i faith as guardian. Now, Abdul Baha doesn't look very happy or healthy here because this is in Adrianople, and this was a passport photo taken so they could identify him right before they were exiled to Akka. This is Mullah Zainul Abidin, another transcriber, a beautiful man, as you can see. And this is the story of his meeting with Baha'u'llah and becoming another of the amanuenses. Before his conversion to the Baha'i faith, he was a learned mujtahid, a doctor of Islamic law, and an outstanding figure in his native town of Najaf, Abad. He became an ardent Baha'i about the time of the imprisonment of Baha'u'llah in the Siatal and was bitterly opposed and persecuted by those very people who were once his admirers and followers. Later, he traveled to Baghdad and eventually attained the presence of Baha'u'llah after his return from the mountains of Kurdistan. So this would be about 1856. As a result of this meeting and of receiving some tablets from Baha'u'llah, his soul was transformed and attained such heights of faith and dedication that he is numbered among the outstanding apostles of Baha'u'llah. After his release from a long period of exile and imprisonment in Mosul, Iraq, he made his way to Akka, where he spent the rest of his days in Baha'u'llah's service, mostly as a scribe. Mishkin Kalam. Now, Mishkin Kalam was a noted artist and calligrapher in the court, and he became a follower of Baha'u'llah, an apostle of Baha'u'llah as well. This is one of the more beautiful pieces he's done. Well, all of them are so beautiful, the Bird of Paradise. And it's actually words here, as you can see the letters, but it's hard, and if you're not Persian, I guess even if you are, to make out what it says, and I don't remember myself offhand. But there, if you look online, you can find a bunch of these, and they're just incredible. This is the calligraphy of Mishkin Kalam. This is a text of a letter to Ahmad Yazdi. Beautiful, beautiful work. Seeing this page of revelatory writing, now what I'm referring to here is what's about to follow, these two pages here. Seeing this page of revelation writing, and this is the shorthand that Mirza Khan made up, it looks almost like a sketch by a 20th century abstract expressionist artist. But these are Baha'u'llah's words hurriedly captured by his scribe. Later, Mirza Khan would copy out his marks in legible handwriting. Sometimes he could not even read his own writing, and he had to ask Baha'u'llah to help him decipher what was dictated. Then Baha'u'llah would give his seal of approval to the clean copy. Other followers would then take this version and write it out again, sometimes bind the verses into books like this one. And this is a caption under a picture of one of those books. So they could be transported and shared with the people throughout the Middle East, even as far afield as India and Burma or China. Now, this is the shorthand. This is the shorthand that's not quite as scribbly as this one, which I think is a better example of exactly how indecipherable it would be to anyone but him. And these are some of Mirza Khan's reed pens. He would of course, cut them and get the point he liked, and then he would dip them in the ink pots. One of the major features of the revelation of Baha'u'llah is the authenticity of its revealed word. Unlike the dispensations of the past, when the words of the prophet were not recorded at the time they were uttered, the words of Baha'u'llah were written down as he dictated them. In many cases, the circumstances in which he revealed his tablets are recorded by his amanuensis or by other trusted companions and pilgrim disciples who at one time or another were privileged to be in his presence. This is one of the collections, one of the books that caption was talking about. Once the tablet was written, several copies had to be made for the purpose of disseminating them among the believers. There were times in Baha'u'llah's life when the outpouring of divine revelation outpourings were so profuse that even a number of scribes working day and night to transcribe his tablets were still unable to cope with them all. Some have left to posterity volumes of compilations in their own handwritings. And of course, some of you may recall that in God Passes By, the Guardian says that he had Mirza Khan, when he was in Baghdad, dispose of hundreds of thousands of verses that he said humankind would not be ready for in this dispensation. So we would have to wonder, what was that about? What did he talk about in those? So some more about the revelatory process. The onrushing force of the Holy Spirit produced at the time of revelation awe-inspiring physical effects on Baha'u'llah. An ordinary human being becomes overwhelmed when he receives news of exceptional import. How much more then would the human temple of the manifestation of God be affected when it becomes the channel through which the Holy Spirit of God flows to mankind? And we're fortunate to have at least one, I think there's some others, Tarazah Samandari, I believe, was witness to Baha'u'llah revealing a work, and when he was a young man of about 16. And he talks about that in one of his talks, I believe. No, but here again, we're dealing with more details about the specifics of the revelatory process. No one except his amanuensis was allowed to be present at the time of revelation, but occasionally some of the believers were permitted to remain for a short time. Those who received this privilege witnessed a special glory and radiance which emanated from him. So dazzling was his transfiguration that many found themselves unable to gaze on his face. And of course, that happens. There are stories of that when he wasn't revealing, that many could not, they felt overpowered when they looked at his face. Now, this is Haji Mirza Hyder Ali, the delight of the hearts. I think he was an apostle of Baha'u'llah also, and he was, there was a lovely book by him and about him. But he was one of those privileged to witness it, and we are privileged that he wrote it down. It was during one of his visits to Akka that Haji Mirza Hyder Ali was allowed to enter the presence of Baha'u'llah at the time of revelation. He has left to posterity the following brief account of that memorable occasion. When permission was granted and the curtain was withdrawn, I entered the room where the King of Kings and the ruler of this world and the next, nay, rather the ruler of all the worlds of God, was with great authority seated on his couch. Now, I presume this is the same room we visit on pilgrimage at Baji. The verses of God were being revealed and the words streamed forth as in a copious rain. Methought the door, the wall, the carpet, the ceiling, the floor, and the air were all perfumed and illumined. They all had been transformed, each and every one, into ears and were filled with a spirit of joy and ecstasy. Each object had become refreshed and was pulsating with life. To which worlds I was transported and in what state I was, no one who has not experienced such as this can ever know. So it's so elusive and so ineffable that words do not do justice to the experience, but that's a very good poetic description, about as good probably as we're going to get. It has been said that one of the effects of the revelation of the tablets on Baha'u'llah when he was in this revelatory process, or when he was through, was that he would remain for some time after in a state of excitement and as a result would be unable to eat. And of course, we also have the description of him walking along the banks of the river Tigris as he revealed the hidden words. That's something that really I hadn't thought of much, and that is, does he have control over when something is to be revealed? Now is it time to reveal the Agdas and so on? I would guess that he would to a certain extent, but that would be a question I'd like to ask when I get to the next world. presuming I have the privilege of being in the same vicinity of having access to such authority. These are two websites that you can go to on your computer when you download this as a PDF file. The first one is, you can see that it's pictures of Adrianople, but it's got pictures of all of the places that Baha'u'llah lived, what they looked like back at the time, and what they look like now that they've been refurbished and refinished by the Baha'i World Center. And the second one is a resource for Baha'i sacred texts. This is from a museum, the British Museum. Well, this is our last slide, and this is also one you're very familiar with. I didn't capture the whole picture, but it's the calligraphy of, sometimes called the greatest name, Ya Baha'u'llah Baha. And this was done, of course, the ring symbol is calligraphy done by Abdul Baha. This was done by Mishkin Khalin. And of course, a lot of Baha'is, many Baha'is have this on their doorway as a prayer that they can turn towards when they do their morning or evening prayers. So it's not unusual to place this on an eastern wall if you're in the west, whichever direction is the Qibla. And there is the Qibla. And that's the end of my presentation. So thank you very much. And we will now entertain any questions or discussion, observations. I would love to hear what your own thoughts have been or what you have discovered in your own study of the text regarding the revelatory process and what effect it had on you when you studied the Baha'i faith and realized that this process took place. That, I mean, it's not that we wouldn't have believed in Baha'u'llah if he had done several versions of the work, but this is a proof by itself. And this is why over and over, as I've said several times in other discussions, this is why over and over Baha'u'llah emphasizes that he never trained under anyone, he never went to any school, and so forth. All right, let me stop sharing my screen, and I will be happy to have some discussion if anyone has anything to ask or add.